I want to start off by saying, well, Cole, that was a really great talk. And I just want to say I'm a first generation scientist. I'm always jealous when farmers get to, say how many generations they are. I'm with my people here. I think this has been a great session. I really want to thank John and Rajan for inviting me to this conference and get out of Arizona for a little bit. And it's really wonderful to hear about all the work going on in New Mexico. I feel, we always joke around saying that Arizona is 30 years behind California, but we're also behind New Mexico in a lot of ways, and it's great to hear. So I'm learning about your Healthy Soils program. I would very much like to extend, across the Southwest. John and I have been talking a bit about that. So I'm going to be talking to you about soil health in really the hottest and driest agricultural region in the U.S. This is, you could view Yuma County, Arizona, which is where I'll be talking about most, as sort of the canary in the coal mine. Katie mentioned 16 inches of rain and was saying that wasn't much. Well, I'm jealous of that. We get about 3 inches of rain per year. And farmers are using roughly 7 acre-feet of water per acre per year, which I did the math, is about 500 to billion gallons of water per year that's being used in this region, as long as Lake Mead is high enough, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty in this area. Our pH is also, soil pH is like 8 to 8.5 in a lot of these areas. So why? People are like, okay, great, why are we even growing food in the desert? Well, if you want nutritious vegetables year-round, we need to be growing in these areas. For about half of the year, growers are growing in Yuma. About 90% of leafy greens and fresh vegetables are coming from this area between November and March. Then a lot of these growers just moved up to Salinas Valley in California. It's the same operations that they just move around. So that's the context about why I think you should care. I want to mention, I think, something that's unique about what we have going on, and I need to also really mention the Yuma Center of Excellence for Desert Agriculture. They've been really key in what I've been able to accomplish so far and with my colleagues. We also have a lot of, besides cooperative extension and University of Arizona support, we've gained a lot of support from some major growers, fertilizer companies, equipment companies. Everybody's interested in improving soil health. There's a couple surveys I want to start off. I'm not cooperative extension, but I depend on the results that are produced from cooperative extension. This is one actually in the upper Midwest, a survey that was done I think back in 2020 that really highlights what we're already talking about here. Which benefits of soil health are most important to you? Building organic matter. So that goes along with what we've heard already today. In Yuma County in Arizona, which I said is a multi-billion-dollar business there and big food producer, the second one up there, soil health conservation, was ranked the highest in terms of either slightly prefer or prefer a great deal. You could argue one of the biggest problems with lettuce is called Fusarium wilt of lettuce. That you could argue is also related to soil health. That goes along with what Cole was talking about with disease management. And then my counterpart in cooperative extension, Divankar Sanyal, did this soil health survey last year and asked growers and other industry stakeholders what their sort of priorities were related to and goals were related to soil health. And the top 3 were crop productivity, water conservation, soil fertility, and there's this big need to understand the soil biology and soil health status. So I think we're all in the same boat, despite these different state lines. I don't need to show this; it's already been shown before. In terms of the definition, I guess what I really want to highlight is because a big focus of this conference is about soil carbon, soil organic carbon, although we could talk about soil inorganic carbon as well. We're really focusing on organic carbon. And it really is a holistic indicator of soil health because it spans physics, chemistry, and biology. Another definition I like to give is through this soil health, Desert Ag Soil Health Initiative, or DASHE, that I've started with the Yuma Center of Excellence for Desert Agriculture and industry donors. The vision really is to advance soil health knowledge and implementation of best management practices to support the sustainability of desert food production and human nutrition for the next 100 years and beyond. So we're really thinking long term. I'll show you why we're thinking 100 years in advance, but I think it goes along well again with maybe only having 60 harvests left. We need to go beyond 60 years, right? This has, I think, already been mentioned as well about the coverage of dry lands at a global scale. I should also mention I did find a scientific journal citation that also says roughly 44–45% of croplands in the world are in drylands.
Wow.
So I think that's also important to note that a lot of the drylands of the world, a lot of the drylands of the world are croplands as well. So I'd like to present some interesting results from really our inaugural workshop for DASHE. Was a grower workshop of 25 to 30 of the largest scale growers in the Yuma region. And we first wanted to get a better idea of what does soil health mean to you. And this goes along well with the panel that was earlier today. And these are direct quotes from growers. And one of my favorites is that first one, an invitation to look holistically. Supporting the growth of healthy crops now and 100 years from now. So thinking long term, it's not an E. coli outbreak, an emergency that you have to respond to right away. There's a long-term aspect to soil health. Disease, not having disease, that is, balancing water retention, keeping salts at a manageable level. Salts are one of the top priorities of growers in this region, just like mentioned here in New Mexico. And I highlighted the one related to organic matter, rich in organic matter in nutrients, and is able to convert nutrients into a usable form. We next asked growers about obstacles, which I'm not going to show here today, but really it goes along well with also what they viewed as the key knowledge gaps related to addressing soil health. And the first thing is we need to be able to measure soil health, right? Just like if you were to go to your doctor and say, they measure your cholesterol, you need to know, is that normal? Is that too high? If it is high, you don't just want to be told to leave the office. You want to know, okay, what can I do about it if it is high or if something else is low? How to adjust practices or even the definition of soil health for different soil types, different crops. The definition of soil health might vary by what crop you are growing. The bugs in the jug, which are one of my favorite terms, the soil health products, an overwhelming number of soil health products out there. Which ones of these work? Which ones of these are ineffective? A lot of these are developed in wetter parts of the country or the world. Which ones of these actually work in a hot and dry climate? What are products or practices that can leach salts? How to remediate? They call there in Yuma, the summer is the death season because it's hot, extremely hot, above 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and kills off a lot of the soil microbes. So how do you sustain soil health during that time? Disease, what makes a quality compost? How to reduce irrigation while still maintaining nutrient availability? What do we do about fallowing and those effects on soil biology? Which parts of Arizona are already having required fallowing, seasonal fallowing? How to deal with irrigation sanitizers. If you didn't know, for lettuce now, after the last E. coli outbreak, they require overhead irrigation to be sanitized, that water, before they apply it to these fresh vegetables. If you're eating a salad in the US between November and March, chances are it's coming from Yuma. And then, do organic practices actually produce better soil health? Is really unknown. And then finally, we asked about what guidance do growers have for researchers, and a lot of these boil down to economics. Don't just worry about creating more knowledge, make sure that they're practical and economical solutions. Show that if you have a healthier soil, that you don't have to add as many inputs. And that's really, I think, what we need to focus on more in the soil health science world is not necessarily on yield, but reducing inputs. Clarifying the problem about exactly what needs to change. And again, these will be available after the conference, so I know I'm going through them relatively quickly. And then, what do they need to do to maintain or increase yield? So we know that the southwestern U.S. is a wetter desert, of course. That's what the definition of a desert is. It's also a soil organic matter desert. This is showing the dark oranges mean higher amounts of organic matter. The lighter colors are less. And some of these have been mentioned before. Why is it such a challenge to build soil organic matter in deserts? Well, it's hot, and usually it's wet, but not because of rain, but because of irrigation, right? And hot and wet is ideal conditions for rapid decomposition. There's abundant sunlight. Photodegradation is a really important process. It's like why I don't buy, I have 5-year-old twins at home, and I don't buy plastic things anymore for the backyard, right? Because plastic breaks down in our climate. So that's an example of photodegradation, but it also happens to soil organic matter. The sandy soil texture was already mentioned by Katie earlier. And we tend to have, there's macroinvertebrates like ants and so forth everywhere, but there's studies that have shown that they're particularly abundant in these hot arid climates, and they move around. As you know, when you put out seeds, things like ants organisms like ants will move around a lot of these resources. So there's a lot of redistribution. Something that hopefully will blow your mind is that based on, there's this cool study that came out in 2020 with radiocarbon dates of soil organic carbon at a global scale. And this shows the age of organic carbon, and both the top is 0 to 30 centimeters, the bottom is 30 centimeters down to 1 meter. And I'll give you some of the take-homes. In surface soil beneath our feet, the average age of carbon is 510 years in savannas, 770 years in croplands, 1,200 years in grasslands. If you go deeper, it's thousands of years old. This is the average age. So to me, this is what gives me hope. There must be some way to form long-lasting organic carbon. And it's up to us as humans to kind of figure out that mystery about how to actually increase or really slow down the cycling of organic carbon and get more carbon into these slow cycling pools. We've talked a lot about soil organic matter today, and I actually use this slide in my soil ecology course. And really, what is soil organic matter? Well, the basic definition is it's all, it could even be soluble, but it's solid carbon that's not inorganic, right? It's anything that's not carbonates. So this includes carbohydrates, including cellulose and so forth from plants, lignin, lipids, amino sugars, proteins, chitin, humic acids, DNA, RNA, enzymes, plant root exudates, detritus, in terms of dead animals, dead plant leaves, and so forth. Charcoal has been brought up. The whole biochar craze really started because researchers, well, it goes back thousands of years, right, to Central America using charcoal. But a lot of the in kind of modern science was in the Midwest. They realized, hey, there's charcoal in our soil. Where did that come from? And when you put bio in front of something, it just sounds fancier, right? But it's charcoal. And then a lot of the science, which I'll mention here in a second as well, is about microbial residues. Dead microbes, they're dead bodies, that creates organic matter as well. And extracellular polymeric substances, which I will talk about, but these are basically biofilms or sticky substances produced by microbes. So why do we need more soil organic matter? Well, more soil organic matter equals more water. Organic matter acts as a sponge and is really effective at holding on to organic matter. Here are some positive correlations between organic matter on the horizontal axis, and water holding capacity on the y-axis. So this is very well established. We know that more soil organic matter means greater soil stability or aggregate stability. In other words, it acts as a glue to bind together aggregates. Again, this was already mentioned earlier. If you have more soil organic matter, you have more of a slow release fertilizer. Instead of getting sort of rapid nutrient release, right, if you add nitrate through fertilizer or fertigation, it's immediately available. It's water soluble, it's immediately taken up by plant roots. Whereas if you can get more organically bound nitrogen and phosphorus, it acts as a slow release fertilizer. If you have more soil organic matter, there tends to be a reduction in pH, which was mentioned before, and also a buffering capacity to changes in pH. Although it should be noted that soil organic matter does not directly benefit soil salinity. And I need to really work this point somewhere in my presentation that our composts in the southwestern US almost always have a high pH and lots of salts. So it's something to keep in mind. And I'll show some results later from organic agriculture where we actually did find higher soil salinity in organic agriculture. And that's a concern, right? And it's because a lot of these composts have high, not all, but most of the composts, including biochars, are often really high pH. So we need to figure out ways of reducing the pH before adding it to the soil. And finally, more soil organic matter basically means more biology, more diverse soil microbiome. For example, the study on the left here is showing microbial biomass from this study I've shown over and over again where they manipulated organic carbon. And there's more microbial biomass. Here's just one example from the scientific literature showing a control treatment on the right with a lower diversity index. And when you add different sorts of organic amendments, the microbiome becomes more diverse. And what do I mean by microbiome? Well, it can mean different things to different people, but it does mean more species using like genomic techniques. It means more feeding groups, so not just bacteria and fungi, but the grazers that eat bacteria and fungi, the predators that eat those grazers. This is all going on below ground. And it means, and you can look at this later, these different functions. We could argue that the soil microbiome are these different functional groups of organisms that stabilize organic matter and these other really important functions. One that I will highlight is phosphorus solubilization. Phosphorus is a major limiting factor in high pH soils. It's just less bioavailable, so we really need to be thinking about improving phosphorus or phosphate solubilization. And one, I think there is more and more evidence, although I wouldn't say this is strong. There's examples. This was a greenhouse study. I think it's less clear under field conditions, but there is evidence that by increasing organic matter, which is going from none to a lot on the x-axis, and these on the y-axis in this case was wheat production, which they grew in this greenhouse study. There was also different amounts of fertilizer and irrigation. And I really just want to highlight, for example, the green line, the triangles, showing that under optimal nitrogen and optimal irrigation, you get a large increase in organic carbon, in yield as you increase organic carbon. And it's only up to a point. So in this paper, they said, it's a bell-shaped curve. It doesn't matter as much if you're up at 5%. But anywhere here in the Southwest, if you have 5%, that's amazing. So I think that often in our soils in Arizona, we're starting at like 0.3, 0.5% organic carbon. So I think this does show a potential for yield to increase with increasing organic carbon. And this is something that we really need to highlight, again, to make this a reality to growers for them to actually want to invest in increasing organic carbon. So soil organic matter is definitely an integrative and holistic indicator of soil and plant health. There's still a lot of research gaps out there in terms of quantifying these relationships, which forms of soil organic matter provide the greatest benefits, and how do we actually build these longer lasting forms of organic carbon in hot desert climates. So which forms of organic matter matter the most? Well, I'm going to answer my own question and give myself a pat on the back. That is a good question. And I think it's still a big black box in terms of which forms of organic carbon. And we need to go beyond just total carbon measurements to more specific measurements of different pools, they're called in scientific lingo, different forms of organic carbon that matter the most. So right now, in the meantime, we really need to, I think a compelling way to assign soil organic matter importance is in terms of how long it persists in the environment. We want more slowly cycling soil organic matter that can last decades, centuries, or even longer. So this is, if you go to any scientific conference and talk about soil carbon sequestration, they often show this figure from a paper back in 2011 in the journal Nature. And it does a great job of summarizing how the paradigm has shifted among scientific understanding from a historical view on the left, which is where it was really all based on humification or condensation reactions, right? And I should mention, I know there's a lot of interest in humic acids. Humic acids do exist, but there's a lot of controversy about whether they actually exist in soil. It's often an artifact of the actual measurement itself. And this is, there's been like fights at conferences almost over this. And condensation reactions work well if you're in a really wet anaerobic environment. You have lots of time for organic matter to sort of cook and condense into these really complicated chemicals. But the emerging understanding, and I'll just highlight a few of these, it's more about you're more likely to get a long-lasting form of organic carbon if you have physical disconnection between microbes and their food, basically. One of my mentors, Josh Schimmel, always likes to say it's like you're on, you're a little kid and there's a book on the top of the bookcase and it's there, but you can't reach it. There's actual physical space between the microbe and the organic matter, so there's no decomposition. Another form of soil organic matter stabilization is the sticking of organic molecules onto clay minerals in particular. That by being more closely associated with minerals, somebody before mentioned mineral-associated organic carbon, that's where a lot of the science is going in terms of those longer lasting forms. We can't depend on freezing and thawing in most places, right, especially in hot desert climates, but that's how most of the organic carbon is stabilized in colder climates, right, in the boreal forest, where a lot of the organic carbon is on Earth. There's root inputs or rhizosphere inputs, microbial products, which I'll mention here in a minute, and then fire residues are mentioned, which we can sort of simulate using pyrolyzers in making biochar or charcoal. We need to be considerate of wind resistance. For example, it's not a good idea to just throw biochar on a soil without tilling it in. It's very, blows away in the wind. UV resistance, and then I talked earlier about pH and salts. So real briefly before I get to the case studies that I think are the, sort of what do we do about this? We can be thinking about packaging organic matter in aggregates. We can think about how do we sort of encourage this sticking process of organic matter onto clay surfaces. One of my favorite theories in soil carbon science is this onion theory, basically that you know, this could, even for a chemistry nerd like me, this kind of scares me away, is that the clay surface is on the left, and the key thing to show is that there's going to be, just imagine there's going to be some organic matter that directly sticks onto clay. But a lot of the science is showing that the organic carbon that develops, that stabilizes, is actually organic matter sticking to other organic matter. And then you sort of get this onion layers of organic matter that form. Calcium carbonates are really important at stabilizing organic matter, particularly what I've blocked off here in the black is our iridosols, which we have a lot of in the arid parts of the world. And there we found the best predictors, so basically the darker reds, or the reds, mean that there is a positive correlation between the predictor on the left and organic carbon. Clays and silt are positively correlated with organic carbon accumulation, and exchangeable calcium was another major predictor. This paper, which I'm a part of, that was published in 2018, was called Beyond Clay, and we actually can't go beyond clay in arid environments because clays are still really important. We need that surface area, as Katie mentioned earlier. Complex chemicals are still a really important way of stabilizing organic matter. For example, here's the chemical structure of lignin, which is in wood. It just shows that, imagine if you're a microbe eating this through enzymes, it's just going to take time to get through all those different nooks and crannies of the molecule. There's pyrogenic soil organic matter, lots of these aromatic rings, to take you back to chemistry class, right? That need to be broken down, and those break down much more slowly. A colleague of mine, Malak Teofili at the University of Arizona, looked at good and bad soils as defined by, and this was in the Yuma area, and as defined by whether there was a disease or not. And found that in the good soils, and stuff is above my head, but I still like to show it. The main thing is that where it looks like you're pressing your thumb down on the graph, those denser areas of black show what was most abundant. And it turns out that in the healthier soils, the good soils, there was more lignin in particular. And so showing that you need this sort of chemical complexity to create these healthier soils. And then finally, a way of going back to these microbial residues, or sometimes known as extracellular polymeric substances, or biofilms, or necromass, meaning biomass that's dead. And a lot of the science is really supporting the idea that long-lasting organic matter are these microbial residues. So again, showing that it's not necessarily about forming humus, it's about microbes eating that organic matter and then either dying or pooping it out. And that it's actually the residues of those microbes that forms long-lasting. Here's a great image from 1993 electron microscope image showing these polysaccharide strands or carbohydrate strands that are connecting different clay particles. And these are these sticky residues produced by microbes. So hypothetical examples of management options. And by hypothetical, I mean that there's not a lot of data supporting some of these mechanisms, but how might we work with this new understanding of organic matter stabilization? One that's very clear in terms of the science is that biochar is stable. You can add biochar. The big thing, and I was talking with a few of my colleagues that are also biochar scientists, is that the economics really needs to be worked out, and the carbon footprint of transporting biochar. But this is probably, if somebody, sorry to use a bad image like, but if somebody held a gun to my head and said, sequester carbon tomorrow, I would be like, add biochar. I don't have another great answer right now, but But I think that if we can find ways of making it more economically viable, I have some research done by a PhD student in my lab where we co-composted the biochar. We added biochar in during the composting process, and that worked really well. Reduced tillage, in theory, should create more soil aggregates and therefore more slow cycling organic matter. Adding more cover crops, right? More roots should mean more aggregates and therefore more slow cycling organic matter. Reducing irrigation frequency. Water is the best way to connect microbes to their food source, right? It makes these soluble molecules. So by reducing irrigation frequency, that will work. But I think what keeps farmers up at night is like, did I add enough water and did I add enough fertilizer, right? And so by reducing irrigation frequency, this isn't always going to work and be viable. And then finally, these bugs in the jug are various biostimulants, biocontrol, whatever you want to call them. Maybe there's ways of finding the ones that actually produce more microbial residues, as an example. So I'd like to end with a brief, in my final, about 10 minutes? Yep. Cool.
15.
Oh, wow. All right. Take a breath. Is these case studies. And these are from my lab, just to show some case studies about the effects of different cropping rotations, irrigation type, reduced tillage, organic practices, and then kind of a wild card I wanted to throw in there is there's a lot of interest in whether improving soil health actually improves the nutrient density of the foods we create. And it's complicated, I'll say that much. And then I'll end with a few kind of summary statements. So one project that I did through NRCS funding in collaboration with JV Farms, which is one of the biggest vegetable producers in Yuma, was to take advantage of when they set up these 35-acre blocks of 4 different cropping rotations. They were winter lettuce and to bare fallow. That's the one that's hardest to get farmers to do because you're oftentimes leasing your land. So fallowing isn't necessarily a easy thing to get a farmer to do, but he wanted to just see what the effects were. It should also be mentioned that the whole notion of a cover crop, I think, is really like a colder, like Midwest centric idea because in Yuma, in a lot of places in the Southwest, you can be growing, it's a year-round growing season. You can be growing things year-round. I think cover crops are particularly, we're really, the whole craze is really in the Midwest because you can't grow anything during the winter, so you might as well throw out some seeds and grow something during the winter time. However, I think growers in the Yuma region do realize, hey, we're willing to grow something as a cover crop if it benefits our main cash crop, which is are these leafy greens and crucifers like cole crops like broccoli and cauliflower. So we have this bare fallow treatment. The business as usual treatment is the second one. Lettuce into like oats, wheats, or barley, sometimes Sudan grass, grown as forage back into winter lettuce. And then the ones that are really, I guess it used to be grown a lot more, are this Sesbania, or Sesbania, I've heard it pronounced both ways, which is in the hemp family. Apparently it can grow, it's a nitrogen fixer that can grow sometimes 15 feet tall. It doesn't require a lot of irrigation. And this grower wanted to try that out. What if we can sort of plant Sesbania, just add enough water to get it started, and then use that as a cover crop. It actually really, it's easy to disc in, and so it's a very practical sort of cover crop to grow. And then finally, we have the full combination of lettuce, oats, Sesbania, and then back into lettuce. We looked at both their pre-leaching step, which often around this time of year, they're already getting the fields ready for winter vegetables, and they need to leach out the salt. Sometimes growers are adding as much as an acre-foot of water or acre-and-a-half foot of water just to leach the salts below the rooting zone. And that's something that's pretty amazing to think about. An acre foot of water is 326,000 gallons of water that we're just adding to leach out the salts. So it works right now, but only because there's enough water. As soon as there's not as much water, I've heard it put that, E. coli kills people, salinity kills civilizations. And there's history to support that, right? So salinity is probably the biggest, and where I'm focusing more and more, as I see, is the most urgent issue. To just show one of the results from this study, we found that in terms of total carbon and organic carbon, there was the greatest organic carbon in the fallow treatment, which is the one on the left. And probably because of that physical disconnection process, by not adding as much water, microbes don't have as much access to that organic matter. And this was the case even after the growing season, adding that full suite of, this would be the continuous cover treatment, was still lower compared to so this is a counterintuitive pattern. The best predictor of organic carbon accumulation, I just got this together for a American Geophysical Union abstract that was due yesterday, is that potassium, exchangeable potassium, was the best predictor of organic carbon, which is something different. It's not calcium. We want to talk about it later why, but there's other biogeochemical controls. There's a lot of inorganic carbon in this soil. It's like a 1-to-1 ratio of organic to inorganic carbon. A second case study is work that was led by my former postdoc, Kirsten Ball, and we looked in Pinal County, which is between Tucson and Phoenix, where they already have a 40% reduction in water delivery, so they are having to fallow. And we compared drip irrigation to flood irrigation. By far, flood irrigation is used by, I don't know the exact, but I'll say about 90–95% of Arizona uses flood irrigation. And but we wanted to see, and the reason for that, at least in Yuma, is because drip irrigation currently does not properly leach the salts out of the soil profile. So again, salts are the top priority. We found in terms of organic carbon that drip irrigation tended to have more of it. Probably because, again, you're not adding as much water, and therefore there's less decomposition of organic carbon. And these are different depths being shown here. This was an unmanaged sort of natural desert ecosystem showing kind of the baseline level. So agriculture is definitely still increasing organic carbon. And this is the opposite, again, to use the Midwest as our sort of, in contrast, is that agriculture in the Great Plains was always decreasing organic carbon, whereas agriculture in the desert tends to increase organic carbon. And I think the whole idea of regenerative agriculture still is confusing to me, because when you're starting off with 0.3% organic carbon, what are you actually regenerating? So I think that, at least in terms of organic carbon. So I think we need new definitions of soil health and regenerative agriculture in these systems. The third is about reduced tillage effects, and this will sort of contrast with previous results, for example, that Katie and Rajan showed. One of the only, in my approach, has really been to find the success stories, or find growers, rather than set up new trials, find growers that have been doing these practices already. And this is Ron Rayner, is often called Mr. Agriculture in Arizona. And he's been doing this no-till, not to save the world, but to save money. And it actually is, he's been doing it for a long time, just to have less passes through his fields. He does like a cotton wheat rotation with some alfalfa in there, for a few years in between. And we compared conventional in a more clay soil. The reason we haven't been able to get this published in the scientific literature is we didn't have a good control treatment. The conventional tillage does have more clay, but what we did have is really long-term, 10 years and 25 years of reduced tillage. And really the take-home message was that we didn't find any strong evidence that reduced tillage increases soil organic carbon. And maybe a slight increase, so this is showing organic carbon, for example, in 0 to 10 centimeters after 10 years, and it does double between 10 and 25 years. But we need to be realistic, like these aren't even that much higher than the native deserts. So my hypothesis is that this somehow relates to photodegradation, and that we need to actually have some level of tillage to work that organic matter into the soil so that it's not as exposed to UV radiation. Another counterintuitive result. And the final two are about really about organic agriculture. Here again, I use a farmer in Jesus Tovar in Yuma that had already been doing organic, I guess, before it was cool. 30 years of organic practices. He currently does, in both conventional and organic, does like a lettuce, Sudan grass cover crop back into lettuce rotation. I couldn't have worked this out better, Cole, but I had the good, the bad, and the ugly as well here. So we worked this out. The good part of organic agriculture, and we just got, these are like really fresh data that we just got this past April, is that, for example, organic fields had about 50% higher microbial biomass in their soil. So that's the good part, is that it seems like it's increasing microbial life. The thing that you always need to keep in mind is that always a good thing? More microbes also means more decomposers that are eating that organic matter. So we need to find that balance. The bad is that we didn't find any differences in like soil aggregation or pH or arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi between due to organic agriculture or organic practices. And the ugly is really that soil salinity was 28% higher and water holding capacity was actually lower in organic fields. So the organic fields, as I mentioned earlier, were actually saltier. And my hypothesis here is that it's the compost that's providing the salts. So maybe there's a way to sort of desalinate compost. We need more technology there to figure out ways of decreasing salts in the compost if you're going to be adding it year after year. And finally, I have an interest of really linking soil health to crop nutrient density. And here, got a relatively unique data set where there tends to be like soil scientists and plant scientists, and we often get soil samples, different places that we get plant samples. Here I tried to get both together, and we sampled soil samples beneath individual spinach plants and sampled leaf tissue and soil nutrients. And the idea was, what is controlling? If you have more, for example, spinach is a really important human source of magnesium. It also has a fair amount of cadmium in it. That's which is a toxin. So be careful eating too much spinach. Sorry for the downer. But it's something that I've realized, and there's no difference, by the way, between cadmium in organic spinach and conventional. So it's something to be aware of. And but in this case, we found really some counterintuitive results. And what I'm showing here in this graph is all of these different predictors like pH, EC, and then all plant available macro and micronutrients. In blue, where the negative signs mean that there is a negative relationship or a negative correlation between these two. We didn't find any positive relationships. Oh, I'm sorry, this is magnesium in spinach. We didn't find anything like if you have more nitrogen in the soil, you have more magnesium. And in fact, I think the most counterintuitive pattern is that when you had more plant available magnesium in the soil, you actually had less magnesium in the spinach leaves. And you would really expect, okay, more magnesium in the soil, more magnesium in the spinach, and we found the opposite. And I think what's more controlling this is nutrient ratios. Like a magnesium to potassium ratio, for example, was a better predictor. So this is just something to keep in mind as we try to sort of bolster soil health science and show the benefits. So finally, my last slide is the summary. I think that what I've shown is that soil organic matter contributes to many soil health functions, especially in desert soils, and may be a way of simplifying soil health assessment. I love the Cornell soil health assessment. I like the Soil Health Institute. But in general, there's too many measurements, and it's not economically feasible for farmers to measure everything that's being recommended. So we need ways of simplifying. Based on the results I showed, water conservation seems to be the only way to preserve or build soil organic matter in desert croplands. But if we use less water, this may come at the cost of rising salinity and decreasing yield and profit per acre. So it seems like decreasing water is the main way to build organic matter, and that's total in opposition to growing crops in a lot of cases. And then finally, soil health in desert cropland should be assessed and enhanced differently than in wetter climates. So I'm really excited about John's idea also of building multi-state and institution collaborations. We have really similar issues that we need to work on, and we're very different from other parts of the country, usually in a good way. So thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to talk with you.